Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by and welcome to today's Tivoli User Community Ask the Expert series. In this session, our expert speaker, Pedro Guerrera, will discuss setting up Netcool Impact 7.1 clustering. Today's webcast is interactive, so you may ask a question at any time using the chat window or by using the raise hand button located in the control panel. If at any time your question has already been answered, please lower your hand or remove yourself from the question queue. Today's session is being recorded, and you will be provided a copy of today's materials following the call. And with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Pedro.
Thank you, Jennifer. So welcome, everybody. My name is Pedro Guerra. Some of you guys probably know me. I work from the Impact and TVSN Level 2. Q, so probably answer a few PMRs. So today we're going to go over Impact 7.1 clustering setup. So let's start with the agenda. So what is a name server clustering? Set up the name server clustering, and I added some configuration properties that we have added on 7.1. And then at the end we can have a Q&A session. So what is clustering, right? Server clustering is a feature of the Impact that allows you to, install a group of related Impact servers and configure them as a single server instance. The feature covers, failover and load balancing, which is the major functions of the clustering. Basically, what it does is you have one primary Impact server, and you can have as many as secondary servers, and they will synchronize the following information: services, data types, data sources, policies, and configuration settings. So they'll get the database from the primary and copy to the secondary. This is a typical scenario of what you will see on the field. I mean, what I've seen in the field. Typically you will have 3 servers running. NCI is my primary. NCI2 is my secondary, and NCI3 is my third secondary. Most of what I've seen in the field is probably having two servers, but I will say the recommendation to me, if you're running a very high intense event processing, to have 3 of them. So just a scenario. And then there's a property that we have added since our version 6.x, where you can make one of your Impact servers to be the preferred primary, which allows you to do a failover and failback to that primary. We didn't have this in our previous version. We carry on 7.1 also with this property. So on Impact 7.1, there's 2 ways to set up clustering. One is during installation, and 2 is you have 2 standalone Impact servers. Now, there is one thing that you need to keep in mind is that when you're setting up your Impact, you get asked to create an administrator account. By default, it's Impact admin. You can change that. Now, when you're setting up your 2 standalone servers, or you're doing an installation of 2 servers at the same time, you need to make them exactly the same, using the same account name and the same password. So you will not have any issues when you're setting up clustering. If you do set up with different passwords, then you will have access issues, because what happens is one of your Impact servers administrator is not the same as the other one, and when they try to synchronize, it will not be able to do that. So just a quick reminder again, make your administrator, by default Impact admin, have the same password for all cluster members. There's a little chart that I put together, and I've seen a lot of issues with, why this doesn't work, or, I have 2 standalone servers, they're not working, they're not talking to each other. And most of the problems I found is either with the instance name or the cluster name. Okay, so on the first one is the good scenario, right? So you have your instance name. The first one would be, let me highlight it. So the first one is NCI. Let's see the highlighter 1 second. So the first one is, your instance name is NCI, and then your secondary is NCIS, S as a secondary. and then your cluster name is NCI cluster and NCI cluster. Can I cluster these two? Yes, you can. Why? Because they're sharing the same cluster name, one, and two, they have a unique instance name. You need to have a unique instance name to do that. What I have seen in the field is the following. Two people have two standalone servers, right? They have the same cluster name, which is good, but they have the same instance name. And there is a problem. When you have the same instance name, it's not going to work. It's going to complain and it's going to say there is already an existing instance with this name and it's not going to be able to synchronize. Another issue that I've seen is they have the same instance name and they have two different clusters, right? So two different cluster names. Now, can they cluster each other? No, they can't. Why? Because the cluster name is totally different. One is NCI cluster, the other one NCI seg cluster. So can you configure them to your GUI to go separately? Yes. Can they talk to each other? No. They will not be talking to each other. There will be two standalone servers running in two different clusters. So this is a good chart that I put together that, you know, I always remind myself when I'm setting up and when I get a new version of Impact to keep in mind these rules right here. So what else would you need when you're setting up clustering, right? So you need your primary name server host and primary name server port. The same thing for your secondary servers, your name server host and name server port. So I'm giving you here an example of what I've done here in my lab, right? So the host name is the host where I'm going to install Impact. So I have my fully qualified name for my primary. Now my port, when you go through the installation of Impact, it's going to ask you for the name server.port. By default, it's 9080. Okay, you can change that during the installation, but let's for this second presentation, we're going to go with 9080. Now my secondary, same thing. My secondary host name is the fully qualified name of the server that I'm going to be installing my secondary server. And again, the port is 9080. Can the ports be the same? Yes, they can. There's no problem being the same because they're in two different machines, and you know they'll be using the port that is available on that machine. So they can be exactly the same thing. Can you change them? Yes. You know, in the past, you know, maybe if you want to make it 9082, 9083, just to make sure when you're looking at the logs, you don't get confused with the name, you can do that on the secondary. But if you want to keep it the same, it's good with me. In this case, I kept it the same. So during the installation, let me erase, hold on. So the first way you set up clustering is during installation, right? So there's a section during install where it's asking you, okay, this is the name server that I see. So it puts out your primary, right? In this case, this is my primary. I was installing my primary. And then it's asking me, okay, do you want to enter another name server? So will be my secondary name server. I mean, and this is what I could do. I could select 3 and enter my secondary host, and then 4, my secondary port. And then you move on and keep, and then it will add it to the name server.props. So then what it does is, it asks you for also for the internal Derby database, primary and backup. The same thing. You will add the host name of your primary and then the host name of your backup. And this is pretty much all you need to do during installation. Most of us, and what I've seen in the field, is that we do not do that. We probably set up one first, okay? We work with it, and as we're getting more events and we're processing more events, we add another one. So when you do that, how do we do that, right? So that's the second way of doing it, two standalone Impact servers, okay? So what I've done is I go to my primary server, right? It's running. I finish my configuration. It has all my stuff that is running. Hey, I need another one. So how do I do it? So there is a script. There's a script called setNameServer.sh. Okay, that's I know some people, if you work in the past with Impact 5.x and I think Impact 6 also, there was no scripting. You would have to manually go to the name server.props and then web XML file and add your new server. Well, not anymore. With Impact 7, you have this script that adds that for you. So all you would do is this. In this case, I will run this with the add command, and I'll add my host of my secondary and my port. So as you can see, I click here. I added my secondary server, comma, the port number of my secondary. And then it will tell you to complete the changes, right? You need to restart your Impact server. So before I did that, I just wanted to know to make sure that my list on my let me go back. Sorry, my list on my name server are correct, right? My primary should always be host 0, and my secondary should always be host 1. So I went and said run the same script with -list, and it showed me primary running as a host 0 and secondary running as a host 1. So once I'm happy with that, I'll go ahead and restart my Impact server. So what I do is this. Then I need to move on to my secondary. What I do the following. I stop my primary, right, by running the stop impact server.sh. That is under the impact_home bin directory. Then what I do is, hey, I don't want to add the property manual anymore, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to export or copy the name server.props that I just configure on my primary to my secondary server. Okay, so I do that. I copy it to my secondary, and then I run the same script, but this time I'm not going to do an add. What I'm going to do is an import. So what I'm going to import is the name server.properties that I copied just from my primary. So I run it. Again, I'm going to need to restart my server, but before I do that, I make sure I do a list again, and it should show that 0 is my primary and 1 should show as my secondary. And as you can see on the bottom, it does that. So I configure and I'm done. So what I do next, before I start turning everything on, I check the following directories. I always wanted to make sure that my configuration is the same. So under Impact Home, I go to WLP user servers instance. When I'm saying instance there, is the instance name you configure. So in my case, NCI is my primary. So that if I'm checking this on my primary, my instance name will be NCI. Then I go apps, name server.war, web XML, web.-inf, and then web XML. So the web XML will have the configuration exactly like this. I should have, let me highlight it, this as my primary and this as my secondary. That's what I'm looking for in that web XML file. That host 0 is my primary and host 1 is my secondary. Okay? And the same thing I'm going to do for the name server.props. Okay? And then eventually I could double check once I restart my servers, the name server services. But we can do that a little bit later. So finally, once I'm done, what I do is I shut both of them up. I'm done with my configuration. I bring my primary up. Then I bring my secondary up, right? And I always like to check the logs. One of the things that I always recommend, and for you to know that they're talking to each other, not only see that they're talking, but knowing and confirming that one is running as primary and the other one is running as secondary. So what I do is start primary first, then secondary, and I check the impact server.logs. In my primary, I should see something like this. NCI is not acting as primary cluster member. That's what you want to see on your primary impact server logs. So it knows that there's another one running, but this one is primary. And then your secondary, when it comes up, it should say, in this case, NCIV is my secondary, isn't out there a secondary cluster member. So now I know they're talking to each other. And if you can see through the logs, it starts importing the database from the primary. I think there is a question in the chat. Let me see.
Yeah, a question in the chat, Pedro. I could not get the section where the 0 and 1 server was configured. Can you repeat that? I think that was back on the last slide.
Yeah. So the 0 and 1. Okay. So when you install your both your impact servers as standalone, you're always going to have 0, right? But when you add one, it automatically knows the script to add the second one that you're adding to it to a 1 on the host. Before, I know we need to do this manually and remember this, but the script does it for you now. Automatically assumes that when you're adding, it's going to be your secondary, and it's going to add a 1. If you add a third server, it will add a number 2 to it. So that's a good thing about the script, and that's why I like to run. Let me see where I go back. I like to run the list. There you go, here, because when you're running the list, right, it shows you what your configuration should look like. So 0 will be my primary, 1 will be my secondary. Now let's say the order is different. The script, if you do a set.name.server.sh help, it'll tell you how to modify the order also. So this script is very useful and very easy, and updates all the files that you need to update. So I would recommend using the script, not manual anymore. Hope I answered that question. Is there any other ones, Christina?
Yes. Can the secondary server start before the primary?
Yes, it can do that, but then at that point, your secondary will be your primary server. You know what I mean? So unless you add the property, let me go back. Unless you add this property right here. If you add this property, okay, what's going to happen is the following. So let's say you start your secondary, this server out first, right? So this is your primary. As soon as you start this one right here, what it's going to say is, oh, that is a preferred primary. So guess what? What's going to do is going to copy the database from this server to the primary, and this is going to come as primary. So this will be your primary server, and then this will become your secondary, if you have this property. If you don't have that property set up, okay, so this is what's going to happen. So you bring this up, this will be your primary. You bring this up, this will be your secondary. So the rule here is, if you don't have this property set up, whoever was up the longest will be your primary. Any other questions?
We have another question. When Impact 7.1 has already been installed with PBSM, and you need to add another instance to the cluster, do you follow the same procedure? You want to add another instance to the cluster. You want to add the instance to the clusters in another server or within the same server? So let me tell you what if you have another instance in another server, yes, you'll follow the same procedure to set up the impact component of TBSM clustering. Yes, you will probably follow the same thing. But if you have it installed on the same machine, I don't think you can add another instance within the same machine. I think we stopped that at 6.1. Yep, I looking at my notes. Yeah, we don't do that anymore. I know before we could add many instances to Impact. We stopped that at 6.1. Okay. If you have any more questions, Debbie, if you could just ping the question in the chat.
Okay.
We have another question.
Sure.
Can you start the secondary server before the primary, or do you always have to start the primary server first? I think you already answered that with this property.
Yes. If you have this property, you don't have to concern about who starts first. But if you don't have this property set up, then you do. Then you need to remember, okay, I started my secondary first, and that's going to be my new primary. So my recommendation is always to have a preferred primary property set up on one of them, so that way you know that that's going to be always your primary if it's running, if it's up and running automatically.
Okay, we have another question. When you run the import on the secondary, your slide shows from the /temp directory will be copied to impact home /temp.
I mean, you can put it anywhere within the secondary server. So let me see here, right? When you run the import, I mean, I put it under the temp under impact. I mean, you can put it anywhere within the server and import it, but you need to give the full path for that file to be imported. It could be up and opt temp, or it could be root temp, and then it will still import it. It's not a problem. It's just a text file that imports the configuration.
Okay, Gaurav, that does an answer. Okay, so thank you. What's the advantage of a 3-server configuration over a 2-server configuration?
Well, the 3-server configuration, again, it's up to you, and it's up to the load that you're getting, right? Most of them, I think like 85% of the people I work with has a 2-server, unless you're running a big data center. If you're a telephone company, I've seen up to 5 on a cluster. So it tells you, it varies. My recommendation, I'll say, start with 2. And if you see your load getting, heavier and heavier, add another one.
Okay. There is one question in the chat. Will this presentation be made available to the attendants? This is being recorded, so the recording will be available afterwards. If you would like a copy of the presentation, I can send you that as well.
Okay, so, once your clusters are up, yes? Okay, so there's some configuration properties I found that, are useful. They're already there by default, but I run into some cases where the network is not as stable and is not as fast as the other ones. And so there's some properties there that you can, modify. One of them I found is in the name server.props, which is, the name server netcall timeout. So basically, the number of seconds that impact server waits for each call to register on the name server, right? This was by default 60 seconds before. Now, we did have done some testing and we modified it to 30 seconds. Now, in case you're having issues on the network and you're noticing that your impact is trying to register itself with the name server and it's not happening and you need more time, you can modify that property under the name server.props. You can put it back probably to 60, which we had before. Okay, so that's one of them. Another one is under the name server, the server name underscore server.props. Okay, so basically in this will be like NCI underscore server.props. So if it was my secondary, it will be NCIS or NCIV server.props. So whenever you're dealing with the server.props, you need to restart your impact server. Any changes you make to that, you need to restart for those changes to take effect. If you don't do that, the property will not work. So there are some properties there that I found that one of them is one of them, of course, let's say you have two standalone servers, you acquire the impact installations and you want to know if they're, what's the cluster name. Well, you can go to the, to the server name underscore server.props. There's a property called impact.cluster.name, and then that will tell you what your cluster name is. So by default, we usually use NCI cluster, but I've seen people changing it. So if you want a cluster and then you got 2 standalone servers, that's the first thing I would check to make sure they're under the same cluster name. Okay. Another one is the next 3 properties, right? This is if you have a network that is not stable, that is either really slow or, they're running some tests and in let's say over the weekend on your network that might, take a bandwidth away from impact. So what happens is the impact, the clustering, they're pinging each other the whole time to make sure they're alive, to make sure, a primary is still running, the backup is still okay, they ping each other. So
There's a ping interval that property that is 6 seconds. So every 6 seconds does that, and it waits 6 seconds to ping again, and then it does it for 3 times. If it gets a response, then it's fine. Then it waits another 6 seconds and then pings again. Oh, it's still alive. So let's say, hey, I don't get a response from primary in 6 seconds. It waits 6 seconds. It executes it again another time, and executes another time, and it says, oh, primary is down. After 3 times, if it doesn't get a response from the primary, then secondary will be, okay, let me take the role of primary. Okay. So let's say you're running, like I said, a testing, or your network is flaky, or you're dealing with some issues on the network. You can change these properties. Okay. You can increase the time, and then the value of how many times you want to be paying. So again, if you make the changes on here on this on the server.props, you need to restart your impact server. Here are some properties that you can add on your primary. Again, I recommend to have the preferred primary equal to true. That's a property that make your primary always be a primary server. Okay, and there's some properties on the secondary server that I found that some customer uses, some other ones not. It's just to increase the time to wait for the primary to come up. Again, if you're having a slow machine, running our resources that's running other Netcool products or other things that takes time for the primary to come up, then you might increase this property. Okay, so you add the property to equal, wait for primary equal to true, and then you add the time in milliseconds. So by default, it's 4 minutes. So if you need more than 4 minutes for your server to come up, then I would recommend you increase that property. Again, this is on your secondary only. If you change it, again, is the server.props, you need to restart your impact server. Okay? And that's pretty much it, guys. This is how you will configure it. And, that's the properties I'll recommend, according to what you have. Do we have any other questions, Christina?
I have a couple more questions.
Mm-hmm.
You told about the load balancing. Could you talk about the load balancing configuration?
Yeah, and that part of it, I always ask my level 3 about that. Hey, how do we deal with load balancing? And this part of the code is embedded. The best answer I got from development was that it's a combination of how much memory, how many events, how large is your queue, and how many threads are you using on your impact, on your primary. Okay, so it's a combination of those 4, right? If you see that using a lot of threads, memory is increasing, and your queue is falling behind, then what primary will do automatically, it will say, hey, I need help from my secondaries. I need to share the load. And it'll start assigning the secondary some policies to be executed on the secondary servers. So that's how it does it. More details about that, they don't want to give. Again, it's one of the key features of this product, right? If you give all your secrets, then you guys would not be purchasing this product.
There's another question. Is there any bandwidth requirements between the primary and secondary?
Good one. I do not know it exactly, but I could take that offline. If you would like to open a PMR and then you just put my name on it and the question, I'll be glad to ask either the test team or development about it. I haven't seen any document about the bandwidth requirement, but I could double check on that.
Okay, there's another question. Can I have some policies that run on a specific impact server? I think they're asking if you can have a policy that runs specifically on the primary and secondary.
Well, you technically don't want to do that, right? I mean, then definitely, then you would not need clustering. At that point, I will do just 2 standalone servers, right? The point of clustering is that you have one server that is running, and if it needs help, goes to the secondary. If you want to have just one policy running on one particular instance of impact, I will do 2 standalone servers. Then you don't need clustering at that point. And no, you cannot assign that. You cannot change, say, okay, primary, you only run these 3 policies, and secondary, you run all this other 4. No.
Okay. We have another question. Does it support load balancing? You already answered that. If the load balancing is internal.
Yeah.
Here's another question. How does database replication work? Do the secondaries have an up-to-date copy of the database? And
Yes.
does the database replicate itself over time, etc.?
So, good question. Yeah. So when you start the first time, you're starting both of the servers, right? So primary starts up, secondary starts up. So what it does, automatically secondary erases database and copies a brand new copy from the primary. Okay, so that happens. While both of them are up, they're talking to each other. You see that ping timeout that I was showing you? So they're talking to each other. So anything you add or any changes you made on a policy on the primary automatically says, oh, there's a new update on it. It sends it out to the secondary servers.
Okay, we have a hand raised from Gaurav. Gaurav, I can give you the microphone so you can talk, or you just lowered your hand. I think you already answered your question before, but if you have anything else, raise your hand again. Okay. And if you have any other questions, if you can type them in, or if you raise your hand, I can give you the microphone so you can speak. I have another question. When you say database, is this an Oracle DB or a DB2 database?
The impact database? Quite didn't get that. Oh, when I say database, when I say database, I refer to the impact configuration, right? Your data sources, policies, services. We call it database, but actually it's not. It's just the impact configuration. Moving on, you will see also when it's configuring, it's saying connecting, exporting data, database to impact. No, it's not. It's nothing. It's not Oracle or DB2 or anything like that. It's just the impact configuration that it transferred all your files under your Etsy directory, all your files under policy directory. It will get copied to the other impact members.
Okay, that's more clear. Is it okay to start the primary and secondary at the same time, or should you always start them in a sequence?
I will always give a little bit of time. Maybe start your primary and then give them about a minute or so to secondary to start up. Now, if you have the property set up or prefer primary, then you can bring your secondary first if the changes were made on that one the last. See, you got to keep in mind this when you're setting up clustering, right? So you have a primary for a reason, because everything, all the work, all the changes you have been working on are probably going to be there, right? Unless that primary went down and you were working out of your secondary and you want the latest copy to be on your primary, okay? But if your primary's been up and you were doing maintenance and primary has the best copy, right? For some reason, let's say, didn't copy over your secondary, you pull it off your secondary for a while and you were running out of the primary only, well, you always need to bring your primary first up.
Okay. Is it possible to replicate the primary server from the secondary, or do you have to manually apply some configurations after the second installation is done?
Can you repeat that question? Sorry.
Yes. Is it possible to replicate the primary server from the secondary?
Replicate the the cluster configuration, or you want to replicate the data sources, policy, services? If you're trying to replicate the data source policy, you need to set up clustering, right? Now, if you need to replicate the configuration, means the clustering configuration, well, you do that with the name server.props by you importing the name server.props on the secondary.
Okay. So the name server.props, you'd always copy that from the primary to the secondary.
Exactly. Yeah. And then to any secondary, I will do that. I will copy always my primary because that should have the best configuration. Like let's say you adding another, my configuration say I'm adding a third server. Okay. So I'll add it first to my primary, right? I add the host and port, and that will be my number 2, right? So let me go back to kind of show you a little bit. So what I'm talking about. So here I will add, so let's say this is what I have currently, right, 01. So I want to add a number 2, then I will use this add again, and I'll put the new host, right, and then the port, and that should add a number 2 at the bottom on my primary. Once I have that, I can copy that name server.props and import it to my other 2 secondaries to make sure they have the same exact copy. Again, the name server.props file on all cluster members needs to be exactly the same thing for this to work. If let's say this was the other way around, where on your secondary you will have this as a 0, right, and this was a 1, it will not work. Okay, it has to be exactly the same thing in the same order.
How much data is sent back and forth when a secondary server is promoted or demoted? I realize that it is dependent on load, but what's the ballpark?
To be honest with you, I don't have that information. I don't. I mean, when you're talking about data, you mean you're talking about the actual policy data, or are you talking about the configuration data? I mean, the actual policy, right? It will know primary and secondary. Okay, I assign this to my secondary. Before it shuts down, it clears out the queue on the secondary and make sure primary knows about that it's processing it was processed or not processed, the events that you need to process on the secondary. Because remember, they keep a copy. The event processor knows what the secondaries are processing.
Mm-hmm. He was asking about the amount of data sent on the wire, so all the data sent between them.
It's not actually data; it's just pretty minimum. It's all your configuration files, which is policies and data sources. Those files are pretty low. No data, just configuration between them. Remember, it's just a policy file. I mean, I haven't seen like a 1 gigabyte of a policy file size. So the configurations, the files are pretty small.
Is there a guide or document for what configuration is and what is not replicated between cluster nodes? For example, policies are, but setting in a property file isn't. True.
So whenever you make a change on a property, right, on a server.props, and even event processor threads, those do not get copied between clusters. Why? Because each server is different, right? So you might not have the same exact resources on both servers. So you might not have the same amount of memory available for you to process events. So that's why whenever you make a change, let's say on number of threads, or you're increasing the memory, the heap size memory using your impact, you need to take into consideration what is available to you on that server. And therefore, that's why those properties files don't get replicated. Because let's say you have a server with you want to bump it up to like 5 gigabytes of memory, but you have another server which just cannot handle 5 gigs, only can handle 3. So if you were able to reproduce, then you will have issues on your secondary probably. So That's why those files don't get configured. And that's why you need to, whatever changes you make to your primary, especially on the event processor or the server.props file or the heap size, those are individual per server. The only thing we copy is configuration. I mean, your policies, data sources, data types, the main core of your impact, but not the props files.
Okay. We had a couple of pre-questions that were a little off topic, but one question was about clustering for the Jazz SM integration. And this is possible. We aren't covering it today in this topic, but I can add this for a future topic. This would probably be more relevant for Web GUI, since Web GUI would do more clustering with Jazz SM. We will add that for a future topic. And we had another question about utilizing the JR exec securely.
Mm-hmm. I know there's a known issue with Impact 7.1 about JR exec. When you're running your impact on SSL, JR exec stops working. And I know there's an APAR open for it. So I'll double check on that, see if there's a fix already. But my understanding was it's going to be, there was already an APAR open for that. And again, if you would like any other topics, to be discussed or presented, just please just put it up on a question and we can take those, Christina, and I can find resources to get those presentations on.
Yes, definitely. Let us know if you have any other topics that you would like covered. And in 2 weeks, I have a presentation on Omnibus backup and recovery as well. Are there any more questions? I have one more question. The primary server manages the connections to the external sources. If the server fails, what happens with the connections number? I mean, are the connections duplicated?
Yes. Well, remember, the connections are managed by the data source, right? So the data source will have the same thing. That's something that reproduces to the secondary.
Okay. Can you please discuss the effect of impact.objectserver.fallback.enabled equals true? There's a question about the object server fallback, Pedro.
Yeah, that's the data source fallback enabled to true. So when you have, this is off topic, but let me talk about it. So you have three options, right? One of them was now fell over, now fell back. One is fell over, one was fell back, right? Fell over means, okay, you have, in your data source, you have a primary object server and a secondary object server. If for some reason impact cannot connect to your primary object server, then it will go over to the second one and then it starts processing events from that. Now, fell back means, hey, primary goes down, it falls over to the secondary, right? But as soon as primary comes up, when your object server primary comes up, it goes back to processing events on that one. That's what it does.
Okay, I'm putting a link for the Omnibus backup and recovery web session in the chat. Can we have two separate clusters as primary and secondary in two different sites?
Yeah, you can. I mean, they're not talking to each other. They're definitely running two separate clusters. That would be the scenario of this right here, right? The third one on the bottom. So basically, this is running on his own cluster member, and this is running on his own cluster member. And then they have the same instance name, but since they're running on two different clusters, that's not a problem. Now, you don't want to run the same policies on both of them because that would be, duplicating the work. And then there will be a mess of saying, well, I don't know which cluster processed this event. So if you want to have two separate cluster set up with two different instances, you need to make sure that you're not running the same thing or running the same exact policies.
Is it possible to integrate two impact clusters in the same tip instance?
On 7.1, we don't use tip anymore. We use Liberty. So yes, all you would do is, again, the name server.props. It will know if they're running the same cluster or not. So when you add the third one right here, it will check to make sure it's not, if it's in a separate cluster, it will come up automatically. It knows that it's not part of the cluster. It will just bring whatever cluster names are up. So what happens is the name server registers itself, and it knows if it belongs to this cluster, if it doesn't belong to this cluster. If it's two separate clusters, then both servers will come up.
How many name servers can we have in a distributed environment?
I mean, the name server, when you're talking about name server, you're talking about name server, the prods file, or you're talking about the name server cluster? I mean, you can have, if you're talking about the prods files, I mean, one per server, right? If you're talking about the cluster, then you can have as many as you want. I mean, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Now, again, when you're dealing with this different clusters and going to the same UI, sounds like you want to go to the same portal. But I've seen where customers have that, and they were trying to integrate one policy on one of the clusters. They got confused by selected clusters, so it created a whole mess, right? So you got to be careful when you're doing this, because just because you're running the same cluster name, right, or it can be confusing because make your cluster names completely different, and make your instance name, even though you're running in separate clusters, totally different of each other if you're sharing the same UI. So you don't get confused when you're selecting and when you're trying to add a policy. Makes it easy for you to work with. But if you keep the same instance name and the cluster name almost the same, you just modify two letters, then it could cause confusion if you're going through the same UI.
Okay. I don't see any more questions. Pedro, can you check the questions? I think I lost connectivity.
Sure. No, I don't, Christina. They're asking for the link of the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I was down to the bottom of how many name servers can we have in a distributed environment.
How many impact instances can you have? It's up to you. I mean, the number is up to how many you want your server can handle, and your data center can handle. It's not. We don't put a limit on it. It's as many servers as you need.
Okay. Here's another question. If you upgrade from 6.1 to 7.1, if you upgrade, say, your secondary, will it still be clustered with the preferred primary, which is running in 6.1.1?
Yeah, there's a link of our documentation on how to upgrade cluster members. It's pretty straightforward. And then I'll recommend it. Let me see if I can find the link and paste it there. Well, actually, you know what? send me a quick email if you don't mind, and I can send you the link for that documentation of the upgrade of clusters. Let me put my email on. Is there a way to put my email in the chat? Oh yeah, here. To everybody. There you go. Just shoot me an email with that question, and I'll go ahead and point you to the section of docs.
Here's another question. Is there any command to know which impact server is taking the load?
There's this property right here. It will not show you taking the load, but it'll tell you which one is running primary, which is this right here. This right here will tell you what the primary. Now, there's a documenter that you can see it into your UI. Let me see if I can share my. You guys, let me see that. I can share my impact and show you a documenter that will show you what's running and what's not on your cluster. Okay, let me take this presentation out of. Let me just escape on that. Okay, let me take this. So this is my impact cluster, and if it comes up, and then if you go to help right here, and there's a web documenter. The web documenter will open this page right here. And so it tells you here that this is your primary server and this is your secondary server. It tells you, you know, how much memory they're using, right? What is their queue size. So by knowing this information, you will know which one's taking a load or which one's not. So in this case, you know, I'm not running anything on this clustering. I mean, I stop all my policies. But if I did, my event processor queue probably will be larger on the primary, which will be this one right here, right? Than the bottom one. So this is a good way to find out. I don't think we have a command for it, but the web documenter is an easy way to check. And then this gives you more information on your data sources, types, you know, everything you have. So.
Okay, another question. What's new in Impact 7.1 when compared to 6.1?
Good one. So basically, we do not run on tip anymore. We can, you know, as you can see in the UI, we have Liberty, and also we can integrate much easier to JAS server. Another benefit is all the scripting configuration that was done manually before. Now it's everything run by scripts. There is no more dependency on adding, you know, manually the, you know, users, your configuration to all that, which you needed to go, and tip, you needed to go to the tip UI, the configuration, add your properties, you know, save those properties, and then, you know, propagate that to the impact. Not anymore. It's just a couple of scripts and you're up and running with Liberty, which is, I think, is very useful. And also with the object server as a repository, the same thing. Just run one script, modify one properties file, and then you're up and running. I think that will be the major components and changes that we have made.
Okay, there's another question about getting the presentation. I'll put my email as well. If you want to email me or Pedro, you can get a copy of the presentation, but this is being recorded as well, and the recording will be posted on the Tivoli user group website. Here's another question. So the impact GUI used to show which instance you were on, does that still exist?
Yeah. So let me erase this. So yeah. So for example, so if I close my documenter here, oops. Let me go back to. I'm not getting used to this tool right here. So here it shows you right here at the top. See it? So in this case, I'm running my primary only. So as you see again, if you were running two different cluster names, right? This is what I'm talking about, where you can get confused because it shows NCA cluster, which is my primary. If I have another cluster like NCI will be my instance, and then Pedro cluster, and it will show at the bottom with the IP address where the server is running. So this is where it shows what cluster is running. Primary will always come up. Secondary will only come up if primary is down.
Okay, there's another question. Can you still do SSO between Omnibus 8.1 and Impact 6.1.1?
Okay, Impact 6.1 SSL, I mean, talking yes. I mean, I don't see why not. You just import the certificates, exchange the certificates, and that's it. You're up and should be fine, up and running. I believe, let me see, let me check my notes. Yeah, I had a customer having that, so shouldn't be a problem. And if you do, please open up EMR.
Does HA work like primary shutdown plus secondary restart, so data is lost for policies running in progress?
No. No data is lost because remember, there's if you look at your event processor, right? There's always a queue number. So that queue number is kept by the secondary. It knows where to stop processing by the queue number, and it takes over from there. So definitely, there's no data loss.
Okay, I think that's the end of our questions.
Great. That was an excellent Ask the Expert session. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending. And a special thank you to you, Pedro and Christina, for offering your time and sharing your knowledge with us. That was great.
No, thank you.
Thank you. Please take a few moments. Yeah, take a few moments to fill out our post-event survey. Your input is very important to us. This now concludes the conference today, and you may disconnect. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everybody. Take care, and then until the next one. Thank you, Jennifer and Christina.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.